And I came across this passage today. It was a letter written to Zeno, the philosopher, who was the founder of Stoicism, right? And as I'm reading from Diogenes, the lives of the eminent philosophers, I'm finding here there's so many great examples of how the rulers of these nations really looked up to the philosophers of their time. But King Antigonus. Anyway, I'm going to have to get that right. But anyway, he says this to Zeno in his letter: "While in fortune and fame I deem myself your superior, in reason and education I own myself inferior, as well as the perfect happiness which you have attained. Wherefore I have decided to ask you to pay me a visit, being persuaded that you will not refuse the request. By all means, then, do your best to hold conference with me, understanding clearly that you will not be the instructor of myself alone, but of all of Macedonians taken together. For it is obvious that whoever instructs the ruler of Macedonia and guides him in the paths of virtue will also be training his subjects to be good men. It is the ruler, such for the most part of it may be expected, that his subjects will become." So there's this idea in this letter, and Zeno actually writes back and says, well, I can't go because I'm old and I'm frail and I'm not going to be much use to you, but I can send some of my people who have learned from me who are just as smart. But there's this kind of idea in there that, hey, listen, I, the ruler of this nation, want to learn from you, because if I learn from you, then I can teach that to my nation, and you will be guiding the nation by guiding me. Is this a form of diplomacy as well within a nation?
Absolutely. It's as soon as you get the interaction of two people or more, and one's informing, one's listening, etc. This is the essence of diplomacy. You got a sender and you got a receiver, and you got enough language between them where they understand each other. And I think it's crucial that the king says to him, "Look, I'm the boss, but when it comes to these ideas, I'm going to defer to you, okay?" And the other guy says, "Look, I'm too old to travel." Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But I'm going to send my students to you. See it. So, you need a sender and a receiver, as you do any kind of diplomatic arrangement. And they have to have enough in common and enough difference to make sense to each other. If two people are so much the same, that's why you get two people arguing on a ship or stuck in a room somewhere. They agree with each other so much, they're going to drive each other crazy, because they don't pass real information. They're passing emotions back and forth because they have the same kinds of beliefs. But this is the classic example of diplomacy, is that, and I hear it all the time in America. This guy, Graham Ellison, is talking about there should be a panel of elders, mainly historians and others, who have an acquired wisdom that they can pass on. And mind you, this goes the other way. Socrates wasn't killed or has to commit suicide because he corrupted the youth, which they have. He was trouble. He was a smart ass because he was calling the system into question. So sometimes philosophers can get very dangerous to kings and to the leaders. And so, the philosophers have always admired their ability to leave skid marks, because they're always in the firing line if you speak truth to power and that kind of thing. So whereas they can be enormously influential, and look at, my God, Frederick the Great used to spend all of his spare time with Voltaire. He just wanted to learn from the man. And there have been American presidents who have been enthralled to bring people into the White House. I have a colleague and friend, John Geddes, who's written about 7 books in the Cold War. They're all the same books in the Cold War, but no one knew that. And he was invited into George Bush's White House, where he regaled Bush with Cold War history and what the post-Cold War world could look like, et cetera, what America was doing in Iraq in 2003. So this Cold War historian was invited to the White House to raise the conversation. And I think at the end of the day, he did a pretty good job by raising awareness. Now, this is the other thing about the people you're quoting and the other things. I think, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me, I think serious people over millennia, the serious people have written plays or essays or books. Today, serious people write books. And if you don't like these books from which other nations and people can study and criticize, then you're not a serious person. So when I hear someone is a leading authority on Ukraine, and I can't find a damn book in the Library of Congress that they've written, I'm thinking, where are they getting this reputation? So, you got a lot of people on the cheap. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are people in major universities around the world who haven't done a damn thing except got the appointment. They haven't written the important books. Now, there was a day in Australia when they get a young man or woman and making them professors or head of departments with a promissory note. They'd all come good. And it all happened before the age of 39. Today, you become a professor after you've written or done or got your patent or whatever you've done. So today, you're supposed to have done these things. But there are a whole lot of people in high places who haven't done anything. And you think to yourself, where are they getting this wisdom, this knowledge? And as our great friend Henry Kissinger says, you could only be as smart in office with the ideas you bring in. And when you're out of ideas, you leave office. I mean, you only last as long as the intellectual capital is there. When you've got nothing to say, or you're drained, or you've tried half the things you want to do and they don't work, then it's time to go. This is why politicians have political ideas have a certain shelf life, but sometimes diplomats, they go on and on. And I think it's very important. If these great philosophers that you enjoy and that I enjoy, and the great historians, they haven't left these books behind. And they weren't all easy books to read. And many of them were controversial books. Some of them got them in trouble. Some of these books were burned by Hitler because Hitler couldn't bear reading these things, or his people couldn't bear reading about liberal philosophers. I think these books provide this kind of ballast to diplomacy. You go into a nation. If I'm going to go represent my country in someplace else, I want to know what they read. What do the kids read in high school? What are the classic texts? What are they moving on? What do they think is true, good, and beautiful? When you get to Serbia and you find out that their number one book, their classic is called The Knife, written in the 19th century, I think. I mean, it says a lot about what you're dealing with. Very hard to deal with the Kingdom of Serbia in 1914, and again with the Serbs later on in the war of the former Yugoslavia. In other words, you go into a country, I want to know what their elite and not so elite. And this leads us to the next area, which is, according to the Havana Convention, when you were appointed somewhere, you were assigned somewhere, you could only, according to the convention, this was codified in 1928, could only deal with the government of the day. You could deal with the government. You had no permission. In fact, you were restricted from dealing with normal people. Now, of course, you'd meet the normal people on the golf course, at dinners, the normal people, the normal elites that go to these things. Now, the interesting thing about soft power, which is another name for public diplomacy, which came into being after the Second World Wars, diplomats trying to influence the foreign publics that they're assigned to. For example, during the Arab Spring, a number of American ambassadors were seen among the students. They weren't cheering them on. They were just there. And the students knew that they were there, giving them heart and strength. And that's that public diplomacy, that reaching out to the populations, trying, when they say the Russians are trying to interfere in elections. I get a kick out of this. We've been doing this for 1,000 years. Everybody tries to interfere in everybody's thought processes to turn to force leaders of countries to listen to their people. Because at the end of the day, public opinion is king. Public opinion provides the parameters beyond which you, I, and every diplomat has to work. You cannot go beyond the parameters. So today we try to influence public opinion. But before 1928, that was considered very unacceptable. And then after 1945, 1960, got Radio Free Europe, you got the Russians trying to jam things. Everyone's trying to influence other people's outcomes to produce governments and leaders who will do things more in line with what you want to do. So it works that way. So this diplomacy and morphs into soft diplomacy. So not only do you have diplomacy, which is the management between states, but you got diplomacy in the age of globalization, which is about corporations and NGOs and INGOs and IGOs like the World Trade Organization and the United Nations and the European Union. Then you got the soft diplomacy of each of these countries, how they're trying to affect people in other countries, what they want them to think, hopefully maybe what they will want their own governments to do. So they got all this kind of going back and forth. That's why in 2003, everybody in the world became an expert on weapons of mass destruction. Today, everyone's an expert on COVID-19, whether it left the lab or not, because the whole world's on social media. Now, social media doesn't change human nature or what people are going to do, but I'll tell you what, it gets the word around in a hurry. When the American diplomats got their freedom in 1782, it took 1 month for a letter from Philadelphia to reach Paris. Today, it's instantaneous. So what you do is you have less time to think about it. It doesn't change what you're going to do exactly, but it forces you to move a little quicker before you are overtaken by events.